For Eleanor Vance, a woman whose name was synonymous with unimaginable wealth, every object had a price. From skyscrapers in Manhattan to private jets, her world was a catalogue of acquisitions. But in the hushed elegance of a Michelin-starred restaurant, her eyes fell upon a simple silver locket worn by a waitress struggling to make ends meet. In that instant, the billionaire's carefully constructed empires of steel and glass crumbled, replaced by a flood of tears and a memory she had buried for 50 years. What was it about this cheap piece of jewelry that could shatter the composure of one of the world's most powerful women? The answer would unravel a story of lost love, forced sacrifice, and a secret that money could never buy. Eleanor Vance moved through the world with a quiet, practiced authority. At 82, her posture was impeccable, her silver hair styled in a flawless chignon, and her eyes, the color of a stormy sea, missed nothing. Tonight she was dining at Aria, San Francisco's most exclusive restaurant, a place where the tasting menu cost more than the monthly rent for most of the city's inhabitants. It was a Tuesday, a day of no particular significance, which was precisely why she was there. Anniversaries and birthdays were too painful, filled with the ghosts of a life once lived. Tuesdays were blessedly empty. Her companion was her son, Julian Vance, the CEO of Vance Industries, the global tech empire her late husband Richard had built. Julian was sharp, ambitious, and wore a suit tailored with surgical precision. He spoke of quarterly earnings and market acquisitions, his words forming a familiar, monotonous drone that Eleanor had long ago learned to tune out. "Mother, are you listening?" Julian asked, a hint of impatience in his voice. "The board is pushing for the acquisition of Aerosphere. It's a $1 trillion play." Eleanor offered a faint smile, her gaze drifting around the opulent room. Crystal chandeliers dripped light onto tables draped in heavy linen. The clinking of cutlery was a delicate symphony. It was all so perfect, so controlled, so suffocatingly lonely. Richard had been gone for a decade, and with him all the color had drained from her world. Now her life was a gilded cage, beautiful from the outside but cold and empty within. A young waitress approached their table to refill their water glasses. She moved with a quiet efficiency that spoke of exhaustion. Her uniform was pristine, but showed the faintest signs of wear at the cuffs. Her hair, a simple brown ponytail, was slightly askew as if she'd been rushing. She was unremarkable in every way, just another face in the endless parade of service staff that populated Eleanor's life. "Will there be anything else, Mr. Vance?" "Mrs. Vance?" the waitress asked, her voice soft but clear. Julian dismissed her with a wave of his hand, already engrossed in his phone. But Eleanor's eyes were not on the waitress's face. They were fixed on her neck. Peeking from the collar of her uniform was a silver chain. It was thin and delicate, the kind of thing a young girl might wear. But it was the pendant that made Eleanor's breath catch in her throat. It was a starburst locket, its silver slightly tarnished with age. At its very center, where the rays of the star converged, was a tiny, deep blue sapphire, no bigger than a pinhead. Time stopped. The murmur of the restaurant faded into a dull roar in Eleanor's ears. Her heart began to pound against her ribs, a frantic, painful rhythm. It couldn't be. After all these years, it simply couldn't be. There were millions of lockets in the world, but not like this one. This one was unique. She knew every groove, every imperfection in the hand-engraved rays. She knew the feel of its cool metal against her skin. She had designed it herself. "Mother, what is it? You look pale," Julian said, finally looking up from his screen. Eleanor didn't hear him. Her vision tunneled, focusing solely on the locket. A torrent of memories locked away for half a century broke free. A summer of stolen glances, the scent of oil paints and turpentine, the weight of a forbidden love, and the gut-wrenching pain of a choice she was forced to make. The waitress, sensing the older woman's intense stare, shifted uncomfortably. She tucked the locket further into her collar, a subconscious protective gesture. But it was too late. Eleanor had seen it. A sound escaped her lips, a choked, agonizing sob that was utterly alien in the refined atmosphere of Aria. Her manicured hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and profound, soul-deep grief. Tears, hot and unstoppable, streamed down her perfectly powdered cheeks, carving paths through the mask of composure she had worn for decades. "That locket," she whispered, her voice trembling, her finger pointing with a shaky hand. Where did you get that locket?" The entire restaurant seemed to fall silent. Julian stared, dumbfounded, at his mother's unprecedented emotional breakdown. The young waitress, whose name tag read Mia, looked from the weeping billionaire to the locket at her neck, her face a canvas of confusion and alarm. Eleanor Vance, the matriarch of a financial dynasty, a woman who had faced down hostile takeovers and buried a husband without shedding a public tear, was crying. Not with quiet dignity, but with the raw, heart-shattering anguish of a long-lost hope that had just impossibly reappeared. The scene at Table 7 sent a ripple of consternation through Aria. The maitre d', a man named Jean-Pierre, who prided himself on orchestrating flawless evenings, hurried over his face a mask of professional concern. "Is everything all right, Mrs. Vance?" he inquired, his voice a low, soothing murmur. Julian, recovering from his shock, quickly took control. "My mother is just feeling a bit unwell. A momentary episode. We'll be fine." He shot a sharp, dismissive glare at the waitress Mia. "You can go." But Eleanor's hand shot out her grip, surprisingly strong as she latched onto Mia's arm. "No, don't go. Please," she pleaded, her voice thick with tears. "That locket! I must know about it." Mia stood frozen, a deer in the headlights. The attention of the entire room was on her. She was acutely aware of her worn shoes, the pen stain on her apron, and the immense, unbridgeable gulf between her world and that of the woman holding her arm. It was my mother's," Mia stammered, her voice barely a whisper. "She gave it to me." "Your mother?" Eleanor's eyes searched Mia's face, looking for a resemblance, a clue, anything. "What is her name? Where is she?" Julian intervened, his tone firm. "Mother, this is hardly the time or place. You're causing a scene." He pried his mother's fingers from Mia's arm and turned to the young woman. "My apologies. My mother is tired. She mistook your necklace for something else." He pulled out a thick black card holder. "For your trouble." He tried to press several $100 bills into her hand. Mia flinched back as if the money were hot. "No, thank you, sir. It's all right." Her eyes darted back to Eleanor, who was now weeping silently, her shoulders shaking. There was a raw, genuine pain in the older woman's eyes that transcended their different stations in life. It was the pain of a human heart breaking. "Please," Eleanor said again, her voice regaining a sliver of its customary command, though it was frayed with emotion. "I will pay you for it. Name your price. $10,000. $20,000. Mia's eyes widened. $20,000 was more than she made in a year. It was enough to cover her own mother's mounting medical bills, to fix the leaky roof in their tiny apartment, to breathe for the first time in years. A wave of temptation washed over her, so powerful it made her dizzy. She could solve so many problems with that money. She instinctively clutched the locket. It was cool against her warm skin, a familiar weight she had known her entire life. It was the only thing she had from her mother that felt truly hers. Her mother Sarah was sick, her memory fading in and out like a faulty radio signal. But when she was lucid, she would sometimes touch the locket and smile. "That's your story," she would whisper, her voice frail. "It's all in there. It'll keep you safe." Mia didn't know what story it held. Her mother's past was a collection of fragmented, half-remembered tales. She didn't know who her father was, or where her mother had come from before arriving in San Francisco with a baby and a single suitcase. The locket was her only tangible link to that mystery, to her own identity. To sell it would be like selling a piece of her soul. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance," Mia said, her voice finding a surprising strength. "I can't sell it. It's not for sale." Julian scoffed in disbelief. "Don't be ridiculous. It's a piece of silver. I'll write you a check for $50,000, right now. You can quit this job tonight." The offer hung in the air, glittering and seductive. $50,000. It was a fortune. But as Mia looked at Eleanor, she saw not a billionaire trying to buy a trinket, but a woman desperate to reclaim a piece of her past. And Mia, who had so little of her own past to hold on to, understood that sentiment perfectly. "No," she said more firmly this time. "My answer is no. I'm very sorry for your distress." She gave a slight formal bow. "If you'll excuse me, I need to get back to my work." With that, she turned and walked away, her heart hammering in her chest. She could feel the stares of every patron, hear the whispers. She fled to the relative safety of the kitchen, her hands shaking so badly she had to grip the edge of a stainless steel counter to steady herself. Back at the table, Julian was furious. The audacity! A $50,000 offer for some cheap bauble, and she refuses. "She's playing you, Mother. She'll come back tomorrow with a lawyer demanding $1 million. But Eleanor wasn't listening. Her gaze was fixed on the kitchen door, through which Mia had disappeared. The girl's refusal hadn't angered her. It had intrigued her. It confirmed the locket's value was not monetary. The girl cherished it, just as she was supposed to. "Get me her name, Julian," Eleanor said, her voice low and resolute. The tears had stopped, replaced by a steely determination. Her full name, her address, everything you can find out about her. "What are you going to do?" Julian asked, bewildered. Eleanor dabbed her eyes with a linen napkin, her composure slowly returning like armor being reassembled piece by piece. "If she won't sell a memory," she said, her voice dangerously quiet, "then I shall have to buy her story." The next morning, the sterile quiet of Eleanor Vance's penthouse apartment was disrupted by the arrival of a man named David Harrison. Harrison was a private investigator, a man whose nondescript appearance belied a formidable talent for unearthing secrets. He was discreet, efficient, and expensive, the best in the business. Eleanor, dressed in a silk morning robe, sat opposite him in her vast, sun-drenched living room, which offered a panoramic view of the Golden Gate Bridge. The emotional storm of the previous night had passed, leaving behind an unsettling calm and a singular, obsessive focus. "I want to know everything about her," Eleanor stated, her voice devoid of its earlier fragility. "Amelia Russo. She works at Aria. Find out where she lives, who her family is, what her circumstances are. Be thorough, but be invisible. I don't want her to know she's being watched." "Understood, Mrs. Vance," Harrison said, making a few notes in a small leather-bound book. Julian, who had been listening from the doorway, stepped into the room. "This is absurd, Mother. You're paying a man thousands of dollars to investigate a waitress. If you want the necklace, our legal team can draft an offer she can't refuse, or we can find its provenance, claim it as a stolen family artifact." "It wasn't stolen." Eleanor snapped her gaze sharp. "And this is not about the locket anymore. It is about the girl. There was something in her eyes, Julian, a resilience, and she refused your money. That is not the behavior of a common opportunist." "It's the behavior of a clever opportunist," Julian countered. "She knows she has you on the hook. She's waiting for a bigger offer." Eleanor fell silent, her gaze drifting towards a small, dust-free bookshelf in the corner of the room. It was out of place amongst the modern art and designer furniture. It held old leather-bound volumes of poetry and several worn books on art history. Julian never paid them any mind, but for Eleanor, that corner was a shrine. While Harrison gathered his instructions and departed, Eleanor walked over to the bookshelf. Her fingers traced the spine of a book titled The Renaissance of Light. She pulled it from the shelf. Tucked inside was a faded black-and-white photograph, its edges soft with time. It showed a much younger Eleanor, her hair long and unbound, her smile radiant and unburdened. Her arm was linked with that of a young man with intense dark eyes and a paint-smudged shirt. He was handsome, with a wild energy that seemed to leap from the photograph. His name was Thomas Reed. The locket hadn't been a gift from her late husband, Richard. Richard had given her diamonds, emeralds, entire real estate portfolios. He had given her a life of unimaginable luxury and security. But he had never given her the locket. The locket was from Thomas. He had been a painter, a brilliant, penniless artist, living in a tiny studio in North Beach. Eleanor, then a young heiress, from a suffocatingly strict and old money family, had met him during a rebellious visit to a local art gallery. Their love affair was a whirlwind, secret, passionate, and doomed from the start. Her parents would never have approved of a match so far beneath her station. Thomas had crafted the locket himself, melting down his grandfather's silver cufflinks. He had hammered and shaped the metal engraving, the starburst pattern, with his own tools. The tiny sapphire he'd told her he'd traded a painting for. "It's the color of your eyes when you look at my art," he'd said, his voice full of a sincerity that Richard, for all his power, could never muster. Their love had a consequence. A baby. A daughter. The memory still had the power to steal her breath. Her parents had been furious, their disappointment a cold, crushing weight. They had orchestrated everything. She was sent away to a private clinic in a remote part of the state. Thomas was threatened, paid off, and told to disappear from her life forever. He had tried to fight it, but he was no match for the power and influence of her family. Eleanor was allowed to hold her baby only once, a beautiful, perfect little girl. Before the agency took her, Eleanor had pressed the starburst locket into the infant's swaddling clothes, a desperate, silent promise that she would one day find her. She named her Lily, but her parents had covered their tracks too well. The adoption was sealed anonymous. By the time Eleanor was free from her family's control, married to the kind and powerful Richard Vance, who offered her a respectable escape, all trails to her daughter had gone cold. She had hired investigators over the years, but they had found nothing. Eventually, the pain became a dull, constant ache, a ghost she learned to live with, until last night. Seeing that locket had ripped open the 50-year-old wound. Could it be a coincidence? A replica? No. She knew in her bones it was the one, which meant that the waitress, Amelia Russo, was somehow connected to her lost Lily. The intercom buzzed, pulling her from her reverie. "Mrs. Vance, Mr. Harrison is on the line. He says he has some preliminary information of interest." Eleanor's hand trembled as she picked up the phone. "Yes, Mrs. Vance." Harrison's voice was professional and clipped. "Amelia Russo lives at 14B Orchard Street in the Mission District. She's the sole caregiver for her mother, Sarah Russo. I'm looking into Sarah now. But the interesting part is the finances. They're in significant medical debt, miss. Russo works 2 jobs, the dinner shift at Aria and a morning shift at a diner called The Daily Grind. Her mother's condition, it appears to be degenerative, neurological. The bills are overwhelming." Eleanor sank into a chair. The girl wasn't a clever opportunist holding out for more money. She was desperate. She had refused $50,000, a sum that could have eased her burden immensely out of pure sentiment. "Thank you, Mr. Harrison," Eleanor said, her voice strained. "Keep digging. I want to know everything about Sarah Russo." She hung up the phone, her mind racing. Sarah. The name meant nothing to her. But the girl's poverty, her quiet dignity, her fierce protection of the one link to her past. It was all starting to form a picture, one that was both terrifying and filled with an impossible flickering hope. Julian Vance did not share his mother's sentimental intrigue. He saw the situation in stark binary terms, a problem and a solution. The problem was a waitress who had stumbled upon a piece of leverage and was causing his mother emotional distress. The solution was to apply overwhelming force. Bypassing his mother, who he felt was becoming irrationally obsessed, Julian had his own team run a background check on Amelia Russo. The results were the same as Harrison's, but Julian interpreted them differently. He saw not a struggling daughter, but a collection of vulnerabilities. Debt, a sick parent, a precarious financial existence. These were levers to be pulled. 2 days after the incident at Aria Mia was finishing her shift at the Daily Grind, her second job. It was a greasy spoon diner, a world away from the refined elegance of Aria. Her feet ached, and the smell of bacon grease clung to her clothes. All she wanted was to go home, check on her mother, and fall into bed. As she stepped out into the drizzly afternoon, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb, its tinted windows humming down. A man in a suit, not Julian, but clearly one of his lieutenants, got out. "Miss Russo," he said, his tone polite but firm. "Mr. Julian Vance would like a word with you." Mia's heart sank. She had been dreading this. "I'm sorry, I'm really tired. I have to get home." "It will only take a moment," the man insisted, gesturing to the open car door. It was not a request. Reluctantly, Mia slid into the plush leather interior. Julian Vance sat opposite her, his laptop open, his face illuminated by the screen's glow. He didn't look up for a full minute, a deliberate power play that made Mia feel small and insignificant. "Miss Russo," he finally said, closing the laptop. "I'll be direct. My mother has developed a fixation on your necklace. It is unhealthy. I want to put an end to it." "I already told your mother it's not for sale," Mia said, clutching her bag. "Everything is for sale," Julian countered smoothly. "You're simply negotiating. It's a bold strategy, I'll admit, refusing the initial offer to drive up the price. But the game is over." He slid a thick envelope across the seat. "Inside is a check for $75,000 and a non-disclosure agreement. You sign the paper, you give us the locket, and you never contact my mother or any member of my family again. You also, of course, resign from your position at Aria." Mia stared at the envelope. $75,000. The number was even more staggering than the last, but the way he presented it felt like an insult, a transaction stripping all emotion from the equation. "It's not about the money," she insisted, her voice shaking slightly. "It has sentimental value." Julian let out a short, humorless laugh. "Sentimental value doesn't pay for oncology specialists at UCSF Medical Center, does it? Or for the experimental drug trials for early-onset Alzheimer's? We know about your mother, Sarah. We know about the debt collectors. We know that the social worker, Mrs. Albright, is considering moving your mother into a state-run facility because you can no longer provide adequate care." Mia felt the blood drain from her face. They had dug into her life, into the most painful private corners of her existence. They had taken her struggle and turned it into a weapon to use against her. It felt violating, cruel. "How dare you?" she whispered, a mixture of fear and fury rising in her. "This is not a threat, Miss Russo. It's an observation of fact." Julian said, his voice cold as ice. "I am offering you a lifeline. That money can secure the best care for your mother. It can give you a life free from the constant anxiety of debt. All for a piece of metal. It's a logical, practical choice." He was twisting the knife, framing her love for her mother against her attachment to the locket. He was making her feel selfish for holding on to the one thing that gave her a sense of history. Tears welled in her eyes, but she fought them back. She would not cry in front of this man. She thought of her mother, of the fear in her eyes during her bad days, and the brief, beautiful moments of clarity. This locket was part of that part of her. "The answer is still no," Mia said, her voice trembling, but resolute. "What you are doing is monstrous. Please just leave me alone." Julian's expression hardened. The veneer of corporate civility vanished, replaced by undisguised contempt. "Fine. Have it your way. But understand this. My family has resources. We can make things difficult. Landlords can be persuaded to terminate leases. Employers can be convinced that a certain employee is a source of disruption. You are a fly buzzing around an elephant, Miss Russo. I strongly suggest you stop before you get swatted." The threat hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. The driver opened her door. Mia scrambled out of the car, her legs unsteady. The black sedan sped away, leaving her standing on the wet pavement, shaken and terrified. She ran all the way home, bursting into her small, cramped apartment. Her mother, Sarah, was sitting by the window looking out at the rain. Today was one of her better days. "Mia, honey, you're soaked," Sarah said, her voice gentle. "What's wrong? You look like you've seen a ghost." Mia collapsed onto the sofa, finally letting the tears come. She told her mother everything: the billionaire at the restaurant, the emotional breakdown, the aggressive son, the offers of money, the threats. Sarah listened patiently, her expression growing sad. She reached out and took Mia's hand, her fingers frail and cool. Her eyes went to the locket around Mia's tall, mane neck. "They want it that badly," Sarah murmured, more to herself than to Mia. "I don't understand why," Mia sobbed. "Why is it so important to them?" Sarah's gaze became distant, her mind drifting through the fog of her illness. "He made it for the girl with eyes like the sea," she whispered. The words disconnected a fragment of a memory, a star to guide her home, before they sent her away. Mia frowned, confused. What Mum? Who sent who away? But the moment of clarity was gone. Sarah's eyes glazed over. She smiled vaguely and began to hum a tune that had no melody. Mia's heart ached. The cryptic words were just another piece of the puzzle of her mother's past, a puzzle that was becoming more complex and dangerous by the day. She held the locket tightly. It was no longer just a keepsake. It was the center of a storm, and she was trapped within it. Julian's aggressive tactics had the opposite of their intended effect. When Eleanor learned from a distraught Jean-Pierre that Mia had been dismissed from her job at Aria, at Julian's insistence, she was incandescent with fury. She summoned Julia to her penthouse. For the first time in years, he saw not a frail, aging mother, but the formidable woman who had stood beside his father as he built an empire. "How dare you?" she demanded, her voice dangerously low. "How dare you use the power and wealth of this family to bully a young woman who has done nothing but work for an honest living? You threatened her. You had her fired." "I was protecting you," Julian retorted, standing his ground. "You were becoming obsessed, emotional. She's a nobody, a grifter looking for a payday. I solved the problem." "You are the problem, Julian," Eleanor said, her disappointment a palpable force in the room. "You see the world as a series of transactions. You see people as assets or liabilities. You have your father's business sense, but you have none of his heart. Leave. I will handle this myself. From now on, you will stay away from Amelia Russo." After Julian departed, his face a thunderous mask of indignation, Eleanor felt a profound sense of isolation. Her own son was a stranger to her, a man molded by the very wealth she now found so meaningless. She called David Harrison. "I want to change the focus of the investigation," she said, her voice firm. "I don't care about Amelia Russo's finances anymore. I want to know about her mother, Sarah Russo. Find her birth certificate. I want to know where and when she was born. Dig into the adoption records for that area for that year. Cross-reference everything. Spare no expense." It was a long shot, a wild, desperate gamble based on nothing more than a gut feeling and a 50-year-old piece of jewelry. While Harrison's team began the painstaking work of sifting through decades of sealed and archived records, Eleanor retreated into her own past. She unlocked a safe hidden behind a painting in her study and removed a small leather-bound box. Inside were the few relics she had kept from her time with Thomas Reed. There were a handful of letters, written in his elegant, looping script, filled with passionate declarations of love and dreams of a future together. There was a charcoal sketch he had done of her, capturing a light in her eyes that Richard had never seen. And at the bottom of the box was a small velvet pouch. Inside was a single earring, a silver starburst with a tiny sapphire at its center. It was the matching piece to the locket. Thomas had only had enough silver for 1.5 pairs. He'd given her the locket and one earring, keeping the other for himself as a promise. A promise to find her and their child. A promise he was never able to keep. She clutched the earring, the sharp points digging into her palm. The memories were so vivid, so painful. The sterile white room of the clinic. The condescending pity in the nurse's eyes. The crushing weight of her parents' decision presented as an inescapable reality. It's for the best, Eleanor. The child will have a good life with a proper family. You will forget. You will move on. But she had never forgotten. Not for a single day. The ghost of her daughter, Lily, had haunted the periphery of her life, a constant, silent presence. Days turned into a week. Eleanor barely ate her mind, consumed by the past and the desperate hope for the future. Then the call came. Mrs. Vance, David Harrison's voice, was different. The professional detachment was gone, replaced by something that sounded like awe. We found it. It took leveraging every contact I have and a court order from a very friendly judge, but we unsealed the records. Eleanor held her breath, her knuckles white as she gripped the phone. Sarah Russo was born on October the 12th, 1973, at St. Jude's Mercy Home for Unwed Mothers in Monterey County, Harrison said. She was placed for adoption a day later. Her birth mother is listed on the original sealed certificate. He paused. The name on the certificate is Eleanor Marguerite Chadwick. Chadwick. It was her maiden name. The world tilted on its axis. The air rushed from Eleanor's lungs. It was true. It wasn't a coincidence. It wasn't a delusion. It was real. Sarah Russo was her Lily. The waitress, the quiet, resilient young woman named Amelia, was her granddaughter. Mrs. Vance, are you still there? Harrison's voice was full of concern. Yes, Eleanor whispered, tears blurring the panoramic view from her window into a smear of blue and gold. Yes, I'm here. A lifetime of grief and longing crested within her, not as a wave of sorrow, but as a tidal wave of impossible earth-shattering joy. She had found her. After 50 years of searching, a waitress in a restaurant had unknowingly brought her daughter back to her. There's more, Harrison said gently. I looked into Sarah's adoptive parents. They were a kind, working-class couple. They passed away when Sarah was a teenager. She had a difficult life. And there's no record of Amelia's father. The birth certificate lists him as unknown. It explained so much. Why Sarah was alone, why they were struggling. Her daughter had lived a life of hardship, a world away from the gilded cage Eleanor inhabited. And now she was sick, her memory fading. A fierce protective instinct, the maternal love she had been forced to suppress for 50 years, roared to life. She would not lose her daughter again. Not when she had just found her. Book the best neurological specialist in the country, Mr. Harrison, Eleanor commanded, her voice ringing with an authority she hadn't felt in years. Dr. Alistair Finch at Johns Hopkins. Fly him to San Francisco on my private jet. Rent out an entire wing of the best hospital if you have to. And get me an address. I am going to see my granddaughter. For Mia, the world had become a landscape of fear. Julian Vance's threats echoed in her mind. Her manager at the Daily Grind had started treating her coldly, cutting her hours. She knew it was only a matter of time before she lost that job too. The letter from the landlord about a building-wide rent increase that seemed to apply only to her felt like another turn of the screw. She was being squeezed systematically and silently by a force she couldn't fight. Her mother's condition was worsening. The moments of lucidity were fewer and farther between. Mia spent her days terrified, feeling the walls closing in. The $75,000 she had refused now seemed like a foolish, prideful mistake. What was a piece of jewelry compared to her mother's well-being? One afternoon, as she was helping her mother with her lunch, Sarah's eyes suddenly cleared. She looked at Mia with a focus that had become heartbreakingly rare. "Mia," she said, her voice weak but clear. "The locket. Let me see it." Surprised, Mia took it off and placed it in her mother's palm. Sarah's frail fingers traced the starburst pattern, just as Eleanor's had in her memories. "My mother gave this to me," Sarah whispered. "Not the woman who raised me, my real mother. I never met her. They told me she was very young and her family was very powerful. They made her give me away." Mia leaned in her heart, pounding. Her mother had never spoken of this so clearly before. "What else, Mom? What did they tell you? Just that she loved me," Sarah said, a tear rolling down her cheek. "She left this for me. The nurse at the home, she made sure I got it. She said my mother called me Lily. She said the locket was a star to guide me." Her voice trailed off, the effort of remembering, exhausting her. "There's something inside. Did you ever look?" Mia's breath hitched. She had tried to open the locket 1,000 times as a child, but it was stuck, the clasp fused shut by age. She had always assumed it was empty. "It's jammed, Mom. It never opens." "There's a trick," Sarah murmured, her eyelids fluttering. "A little notch on the third ray. From the top." Mia's hands trembled as she took the locket. She examined it closely, her fingers searching. And there it was, a tiny, almost invisible indentation on one of the engraved rays. Using her fingernail, she pressed down hard on the spot. There was a faint click. The locket sprang open. Mia gasped. Tucked inside the two halves were two tiny, perfectly preserved secrets. On one side, protected by a sliver of glass, was a minuscule, faded photograph. It was a picture of a young woman with a radiant smile and eyes the color of the sea. The same woman from the restaurant, but decades younger. Eleanor Vance. On the other side, engraved in a delicate, swirling script, were 4 words. For Lily. Find me. Mia stared, her mind struggling to process the impossible truth. The woman from the restaurant. Her name was Eleanor. The name on her mother's original birth certificate was Eleanor. The nurse had said her mother called her Lily. For Lily. Find me. Her mother Sarah was Lily, and the billionaire Eleanor Vance was her grandmother. The realization crashed over her with the force of a physical blow. The obsession with the locket, the offers of money, the tears. It wasn't about an object. It was about a person. It was about her mother. Just as this earth-shattering truth was settling in, there was a soft knock on the apartment door. Mia's first instinct was fear. Was it Julian Vance's men coming to evict them? She opened the door cautiously. Standing in the drab hallway of her apartment building was Eleanor Vance. She was not the imperious matriarch from the restaurant. She was dressed simply in a cashmere sweater and slacks. Her face was pale, her eyes filled with a nervous, hopeful vulnerability. She was alone. "Amelia," Eleanor said, her voice soft. "May I please come in? I need to talk to you. And to your mother." Mia was speechless. She could only nod, stepping back to let the woman into her small, cluttered home. Eleanor's eyes scanned the room, taking in the worn furniture, the stack of medical bills on the counter, the sheer grinding reality of their poverty. Her gaze was filled with a profound, soul-crushing regret. Her eyes finally landed on Sarah, who was sitting in her chair by the window, now lost in her own world again. Eleanor took a hesitant step forward, then another. "Lily." She whispered the name, a breath of air, a prayer she hadn't dared to speak aloud for 50 years. Mia held up the open locket. "She told me," Mia said, her voice choked with emotion. "She just told me everything." Eleanor looked from the locket in Mia's hand to the face of her daughter, then back to the face of her granddaughter. The resemblance was undeniable, the same determined set of the jaw, the same strength in the eyes. Tears streamed down Eleanor's face once more, but this time they were not tears of grief. They were tears of homecoming. "I found you," Eleanor breathed, her voice breaking. "Oh, my darling girl, after all this time, I finally found you." She reached out, not for the locket, but for Mia's hand, her touch gentle and warm. The gulf between the billionaire and the waitress vanished, erased by a truth that had been hidden in a silver starburst for half a century. The air in the small apartment was thick with the weight of 50 years. It was a sacred space, a bubble of time where past and present had finally converged. Eleanor knelt by Sarah's chair. Her manicured fingers, which had signed billion-dollar contracts, now trembled as they gently stroked the hair of the daughter she had only ever held in her memory. She whispered the name Lily, a soft rhythmic chant, as if the sound itself could bridge the chasm of their lost decades. For a fleeting moment, Sarah's clouded eyes seemed to focus on her, and she leaned into the touch, a deep instinctual comfort overriding the fog of her illness. Mia stood a few feet away, the open locket still warm in her hand. The world had tilted its colors, shifting into new, unrecognizable hues. She was no longer just Mia Russo, the perpetually exhausted waitress swimming against a tide of debt. She was Amelia, the granddaughter of Eleanor Vance, the living link between a painful secret past and a future she couldn't begin to comprehend. The revelation was a dizzying mix of shock relief and a profound, bone-deep sorrow for the life her mother could have had. She looked at the two women, a tableau of reunion so raw and powerful it felt like a dream, and her own tears began to fall silently. This fragile, holy moment was shattered by a sound from the hallway. Heavy, purposeful footsteps, followed by a sharp, authoritative rap on the door that was less a knock and more a demand. Mia flinched, her fear of Julian Vance and his shadowy influence rushing back. Before she could move, the door was pushed open with enough force to make it bang against the wall. Julian Vance stood on the threshold, his face a mask of cold, controlled fury. He was flanked by two broad-shouldered men in dark, impeccably tailored suits, their presence instantly sucking the warmth from the room. They were not bodyguards. They were instruments of power, men who solved problems with quiet, unshakable efficiency. Julian's eyes swept across the scene, his gaze dripping with contempt. He noted his mother kneeling on the floor of this squalid apartment, the sick woman in the chair, and Mia, whom he saw as the architect of this whole charade. "I knew it," he spat the words slicing through the quiet room. He strode forward, his expensive leather shoes scuffing on the worn linoleum. "I knew you were a predator. It's a masterful performance, I'll give you that. You find a lonely old woman, discover some obscure detail of her past, and then you weave this elaborate, pathetic fantasy." He stopped directly in front of Mia, towering over her. How much did it take to convince her 100,000 too? What's the going rate for a fabricated family history these days? Mia shrank back, intimidated, but also ignited by a spark of defiance. "You don't understand," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Oh, I understand perfectly," Julian interrupted, his voice dangerously low. "I understand that my mother is vulnerable, and you are a parasite who has attached herself to this family's wealth. Well, the game is over." He turned to his mother. "Mother, we are leaving. Now. These men will handle this transaction. They will retrieve your property and ensure Miss Russo understands the legal consequences of extortion." He nodded sharply at one of the men who took a step towards Mia, his hand outstretched for the locket. "They will do no such thing. Julian." Eleanor's voice cut through the air like a shard of ice. She rose to her feet with a grace that defied her age, planting herself firmly between Julian's man and Mia. She was no longer the weeping, fragile woman from the restaurant or the remorseful mother on her knees. She was Eleanor Vance, the matriarch, and her eyes blazed with a protective fire Julian had not seen since his father's funeral. "This is not a transaction," she declared, her voice ringing with absolute authority. "And this," she said, gesturing to Mia, "is not a parasite. This is my granddaughter, Amelia, and this woman," her voice broke with emotion as she pointed to Sarah, "is my daughter Lily." Julian let out a sharp, incredulous laugh. "Daughter, granddaughter, mother. Listen to yourself. You are unwell. This pauper has poisoned your mind. You have never in my entire life mentioned a lost daughter." "Because I was made to feel ashamed," Eleanor's voice boomed, startling them all with its power. "Because my parents, your grandparents, decided that the family name was more important than a baby girl. They cared more for appearances and their social standing than for their own child's heart. I was 17. Julian. I was a scared girl in love with a man they deemed unsuitable, and they tore my life apart. They sent me away, they took my baby, and they threatened the man I loved until he disappeared forever. They told me to forget, to move on, to bury the shame. And for 50 years I have lived with that ghost." She took a step closer to her son, her gaze unwavering. "You are just like them. You see a problem, and you throw money or threats at it. You cannot fathom that something's value could be anything other than monetary. You look at Amelia, and you see a poor waitress. I look at her, and I see a young woman with more integrity and love in her heart than you have ever shown. I offered her a fortune, Julian, a life-changing sum of money that could have solved every one of her problems. And she refused. She refused because this locket, my locket, the one I placed in my daughter's blanket, meant more to her than all the money in the world." Eleanor's gaze was relentless. "You tried to destroy her. You had her fired. You threatened her housing, used the full weight of the Vance name to crush a girl who had nothing. And still she protected her mother's only keepsake. She protected my daughter's legacy without even knowing what it was." Silence descended thick and heavy. Julian stared at his mother, the absolute conviction in her voice shaking the very foundations of his reality. Mia, emboldened by Eleanor's defense, held up her hand, the locket open in her palm. The light from the window caught the tiny faded photograph of the young, smiling Eleanor. Julian's eyes were drawn to it, to the undeniable proof. He saw the face of his mother before she was his mother, a girl full of a light he had never known. He saw the inscription, "For Lily. Find me." His carefully ordered world, a world of spreadsheets and market values, of clear wins and losses fractured. The cold logic that had been his armor for so long shattered against the irrefutable truth of this emotional, messy human story. He looked from the locket to Mia, and for the first time, he didn't see a pauper. He saw a young woman with his mother's eyes. He looked at the frail, sick woman in the chair and saw not a prop in a scam, but his aunt, a member of his family who had lived a life of hardship, while he had lived in unimaginable privilege. The magnitude of the family secret of the injustice hit him with the force of a physical blow. His entire identity was built on a lie of omission. The fury drained from his face, replaced by a ghastly pallor. The arrogance in his posture collapsed, leaving him looking suddenly younger and lost. He started, but no words came. What could he say? He had been monstrous. He had wielded his power with cruelty, all in the name of a truth that was utterly false. Shame, a foreign and corrosive emotion, burned in his gut. He couldn't bear to look at his mother's disappointed face or at the quiet dignity of the girl he had tried to break. Without another word, he turned on his heel and walked stiffly out of the apartment. He brushed past his trilliant, confused men, leaving them in the doorway. "Go," Eleanor commanded them, her voice quiet but firm. They glanced at each other, then retreated, closing the door softly behind them, sealing the new family within the quiet walls of the apartment. The storm had passed. In the ensuing silence, Mia finally let out a shuddering breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. Eleanor came to her, taking the locket and Mia's hand in her own. "He will come around," she said, though her voice lacked conviction. "Or he won't. It doesn't matter. What matters is us. Now." With a newfound purpose, Eleanor pulled out her phone. She made a call, her voice a calm, commanding force that Mia now understood could move mountains. "This is Eleanor Vance. I need Dr. Alistair Finch. I don't care what his schedule is. My private jet is on the tarmac at SFO. I want him in this city by morning, ready to see a patient. Yes, cost is no object. Make it happen." She hung up and turned to Mia, her eyes soft with a century of unshed tears. "Your mother will have the best care. You will have a home, a real home. You will never have to work 2 jobs again unless you choose to. You can go to school, travel anything. The world is yours now, Amelia." Mia could only shake her head, overwhelmed. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything," Eleanor said gently. She looked down at the locket, tracing the starburst with her finger. "Your grandfather made this," she whispered, giving Mia the final piece of her story. "His name was Thomas Reed. He was a brilliant painter, and he had the kindest soul I have ever known. He would have loved you so fiercely." Eleanor looked over at Sarah, who had drifted into a peaceful sleep. A real family. After a lifetime of loneliness in a palace of gold, Eleanor had finally found her home in a cramped 2-room apartment with a daughter lost to time and a granddaughter she never knew she had. The Vance fortune of stocks and steel was vast, but it was nothing compared to this. This was the real inheritance. This was the inheritance of the heart. In the end, it wasn't Eleanor Vance's billions that healed her broken heart. It was the discovery that the greatest treasure she ever possessed was not something she could buy, but someone she had lost. The story of Eleanor, Mia, and Lily reminds us that family is not defined by wealth or status, but by the unbreakable threads of love that weave through generations, sometimes getting lost, but never truly severed. Mia's simple locket, worthless in a pawn shop, turned out to be priceless, for it held the key to unlocking a 50-year-old secret and reuniting a family torn apart by circumstance. It's a powerful testament to the idea that our true legacy lies in the connections we forge and the love we refuse to forget. If this story of loss and reunion touched your heart, please let us know in the comments below. What would you have done in Mia's position? Don't forget to like this video and share it with someone who appreciates a story about the enduring power of family. And most importantly, subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will move you, inspire you, and remind you of the extraordinary stories hidden within ordinary lives.